Hey folks, Marcus here from the Ashland Fly Shop. Today I wanted to talk about a question that comes up now and again when I'm talking with folks about which rod is the right rod for them. And when you look in the Sage lineup, you find two 7-weights that are similar price, similar specs, and it can be kind of hard to decide which one might be the right one for you. So I'm gonna help do that here today. So right now I've got the Sage X 13-foot 7-weight, and I'm going to compare it to the 12.5-foot 7-weight igniter. These two rods are a little bit different in character, and I just want to talk about some of the things I feel when I'm casting and fishing them. So the 7130 to me is probably one of the most approachable Spey rods in Sage's lineup. It's kind of a general purpose and a general angler rod. I think it's so good in so many people's hands and in so many of the situations that we find ourselves in steelhead fishing. It's kind of the all-around length and weight that we look for, and they kind of just nailed it with the flex pattern that's going on in here, the line speed that you can generate with it. It's just a really easy rod to pick up and to get going with, and it's a rod that you can really feel the load point in when you're performing your cast. And I think that's an important thing for folks, especially if this is, you know, a rod that they buy early on in their fishing career. It's just a rod you can get up to speed with. So this rod in my hands is actually the first Sage rod I ever owned, and it's come with me on trips up to British Columbia a couple different times. It's gone to the Olympic Peninsula, to the Deschutes, to the North Umpqua, here on the Rogue. It's kind of traveled with me to quite a few places, and it's been just an all-around tool in a lot of these venues, and I've really enjoyed using it all over. And I find that the length and the weight and the action make it super enjoyable to use with a Skagit line like the 525 that I have on it right now. But it's also really nice with a Scandi line. That's kind of my go-to setup when I'm in British Columbia in the fall. And it's just a great rod to have in a lot of different situations. One thing I like about it, the same feeling you get when you're casting it, you get when you're fighting the fish. It's really a rod that bends deep when you're fighting a fish, and I really like that. I like being able to fight a fish low in the blank and really bend the thing to work the fish. So it's a great casting rod. It's a great kind of general applicability rod, and it's great when you're fighting a fish. So now I'm out here with the 12.5-foot 7-weight igniter, and the biggest thing that I noticed between these two rods right off the bat is the 7130 just loves the 525 grain Skagit Max. That's just like a match made in heaven, at least for me. And on this rod, I find that the 550 grain is a little bit more consistent, gives a similar amount of feeling through the rod when casting, whereas when you pick up the 7130 with 550, it's not overloaded, but it starts to get a little sluggish. And this rod, because it's a little stiffer, I think down low in the blank, it can just handle that 550 grains a little better. Honestly, you know, we have customers that even cast a heavier line on this rod and like it because it gives them a similar amount of feel through the rod. So it's the first thing to mention between comparing the rods is that the igniter is stiffer. So why would you want a stiffer rod? Why would you want a rod that casts a heavier grain weight? Well, you know, when you're in situations where you're casting moderate sink tips, or you don't have adverse windy conditions or casting really huge flies, you know, a rod like the 7130 will just perform all day. But when you get, you know, really obnoxious wind, when you're fishing in places, steep gradient rivers in the winter time, and you need to cast really big heavy flies, lift big heavy sink tips out of the water, that's when having a stiffer, more powerful rod is going to help. It's going to help turn over those larger flies and heavier sink tips. So while the 7130X has kind of gone with me on a lot of different trips, both summer and winter time, this 7126 igniter for me has been kind of a winter favorite. To me, it just feels like it specializes in that fishing. It's just so at home with a heavy sink tip on there. Right now I've got 10 feet of T14 that just comes off here like nothing. And last winter I was on a trip and was casting 12.5 feet of T17 on the same 550 grain line with a large winter intruder for 5 days in a row, and just had no problem turning that over. So I think the igniter kind of picks up where the 7130 leaves off in terms of power and performance. It takes it over that edge in those situations where you really need a performance-driven tool. I kind of think of the 7130 as the go anywhere in anyone's hands type of rod. And this 7126 igniter is just all business. It's just a get it done tool. Another thing I find between the two rods, for myself personally, is I feel like the casting sweet spot on the 7130 is a little bit wider. Doesn't take me as long to find the sweet spot, and it's easier to stay in it. The igniter, while it's, you know, I have found the sweet spot for me casting it personally, it's been a little less consistent staying in that zone where I'm just getting really good turnover and good loop control. And that can happen with stiffer rods, that you kind of find the sweet spot and you might lose it or come back to it. And that's something to consider between these two rods. I'd say if you're a beginner out there or someone who's got an intro rod and is looking to step up into the next category, I'd probably think in a lot of situations that the 13-foot 7-weight Sage X is going to be the most logical step up for you. It's going to be a rod that you can pick up, get up to speed with, have nice consistent casting. Whereas the igniter, though you can definitely get that with it at any casting level, it might just be that next level up where you want to have a couple rods, have a lot of experience casting different rods, different line outfits, and then step up to a rod like this. The other thing about the 7126 igniter, in my mind, it just has more drive. It's part of it being a stiffer platform, handling that little bit heavier line, but also if you're the type of caster who really likes to drive a rod, the igniter is going to respond better to that than a rod like the X will. Not that the X doesn't generate a bunch of line speed, it's just that when you really want to, you know, pull through a stroke, see how much turnover, how much distance, how much speed you can get out of the cast, I think the igniter's kind of built to generate that next level up of line speed and turnover. So the reality is that both of these rods are really nice. And there will be some of you out there that own both of them. And like me, I kind of use them in tandem together. And I try to use each one in situations where they shine. But for most of you, you have to make the choice between one or the other. So I hope those couple things that I talked about in terms of having the X be more of a general purpose, go anywhere rod, and the igniter being a little bit more of a focus tool, for kind of heavy work and turning over big fish. I hope that helps you decide between the two. Thank you very much for tuning in.